everybody, it is Chris Niccolls here from The Camera Store TV. Welcome back. Today we're looking at the RX10 Mark III. Now on TCS TV we've reviewed all of the versions of this camera, and this is no exception, but we do have some very big changes, namely a very large lens. So we're at the Inglewood Bird Sanctuary. We've never shot here before. We're going to look for some birds, we're going to take some pictures, and see if this long lens is as good as everybody says it is. We also want to see what else have they changed, what else have they updated on this camera. So come with us, we're going to find out. And by the way, it's windy as By far the biggest change on the RX10 Mark III is the new zoom range. We're still getting 24 millimeters just like before, but now we can zoom right out there to 600 millimeters. And this really does open up this camera for sports or for wildlife shooting. It's pretty impressive. One thing I will say though, we've got a brand new ring here on the lens to zoom with, but as you can see there, you really got to turn it over and over to get it to move. I'm not a big fan, it's got a long throw. I'm still gonna use the finger toggle up here. It's smooth, I can easily control the speed. It gets me from wide to tight very quickly. That's what I'm going to use. Now as I'm feeling the camera here, I am noticing some differences. Now first off, the grip feels great. I mean, they've made a new one, it molds really nice, and you're going to need it because the camera did get heavier. We're like just over 1 kilogram here, so a little bit more weight than you're used to, and it is front heavy. It's not as comfortable as the 1 and the 2 series to hold. Otherwise, some other changes here. We now have a focus lock button here, and I kind of want to touch on that. This is a nice feature to have. I can leave the camera in continuous autofocus, shoot something continuously, and if I want to do stills, I can hold this button down. I'm going to use that a lot because what I cannot find is any sort of AF on function to do back button focusing, which I would normally do in a wildlife or sports situation. So, you know, on the RX10 Mark III, they're kind of forcing you to work in certain ways here. Overall though, nice flip screen, great viewfinder, 2.3 million dots, you're getting lots of resolution, and the camera is weather sealed. I don't think we're gonna have rain today, but we were expecting it, so if it happens, we don't have to worry too much with this camera. So of course, no camera on the planet is picture perfect, and we do have a couple things here. First things I've been noticing, the on-off time is pretty slow, not just waiting for the zoom to go away, but if I see a bird and I wanna shoot it and turn on, it takes a while here to respond, as you can see there, before I'm ready to shoot. And I did actually miss a picture of a robin here on the pathway because of that. Now the other thing too, the stabilizer's been improved. We're now getting 4.5 stops of stability. And of course that's a great thing with a long lens like this. But shooting at 600 millimeters at 3/20th of a second, I can still see some motion blur when I zoom in. So I'm gonna try and steady up a bit, but that's a little disconcerting. I would have expected good stability at that range. So I'm gonna try harder, but I'm also gonna crank the ISO to 200 now. Now, as usual on a Sony camera, you're going to want to customize them heavily to get the most out of it, but we've added another button here, C1 and C2, that's handy to have. Otherwise, the layout's very familiar. You got the exposure comp in the same place, movie button in a good position where you won't hit it by accident, and the rest of the layout is very, very familiar. Interesting as well, they've decided to keep the threaded cable release that was also present on the 1 and 2 series. It's there if you need it. I like the new flash. High, pops up, no red eye, that's going to be nice, but you can't bounce it like you can on some other Sony cameras. Otherwise, very customizable. You can set up the way you like it. All right, so as you can see, guys, very tame deer. We can get quite close. Again, the Sony has very good autofocusing. I've been pretty impressed with it. I'm going to my smallest flexible spot so I can get through the branches here because we've got a lot of cover, but it's working very, very well. I'm also very impressed by this. At the longest lens range, I expected this camera to actually have a really hard time focusing. Contrast detect can have a really hard time when you're zoomed in a very tight way. Actually, the RX10 Mark III has been doing a really, really good job. I also noticed this when I was shooting my kid playing baseball just at practice, and same thing, even at the long distance, it would grab on very quickly, so I was quite impressed with that. All right, now speaking of baseball, when I was shooting my son here, it was a good test of the autofocusing capabilities of the camera, but also frame rate and buffer speed are going to be very important. Now, the RX10 Mark III will shoot about 45 JPEGs in a row and just under 30 RAW. It's pretty good. You can shoot 5 frames per second with autofocus engaged, but when you really want to get that moment, you can go to 14 frames per second without autofocusing. Now you can see here, you get the shot right where you want it, ball hitting the bat. However, at the same time, keep in mind you're going to fill that buffer really quick. You're only going to get a couple seconds of real life action recorded. And when the buffer does fill, it does take a significant amount of time to clear the buffer, even with a fast card. Even if I try to go into menu to change something or go to playback to look at the photos, I'm just going to get right into card, unable to execute, and that can be frustrating. Now, the close focusing in the RX10 Mark III, it's not anywhere close to 1:1. I mean, we're still getting a somewhat large frame, but again, I'm seeing kind of what we saw in the ZS100 in that review. We're getting a very good wide or telephoto capability with very similar macros. So you kind of get to choose if you want to have the flat field compression of the long lens or get some of that depth expansion with the wide angle. And as you can see, it gives us quite a different kind of feel to the photograph. So overall, decently impressive. And I like that you can keep your distance and shoot without having to get right in there, because it's a creepy spider's nest. Now, we do have big zoom range on here, and if you're finding it hard to compose your shots or you're not sure what kind of frame you want, there is now this zoom assist. So I can go wide, hold the button down, and I can basically kind of digitally see what my new zoom is going to be without actually moving the lens. Put my box around what I want to frame, let go, and it zooms in. It's novel, it looks cool on the screen. I actually don't find it that useful though. And keep in mind that when you push the button, even though you're zooming in digitally, it's a very small part of the frame. It's hard to really know if everything you want is in that shot. I think you'd find it faster just to manually zoom the lens. One of the great things about the sensor in this, it is by far the best low light performance and dynamic range that we think you'll find in a 1-inch chip. Sony stack sensor means you can go way down in the shadows, still bring them up, get those highlights protected. So overall image quality, fantastic with this camera. You know, with this new grip, I'm finding the aperture ring a little bit annoying on here, frankly. Where it's positioned, if I'm holding it on the ribbing, it jams into my finger under the grip. So I keep pushing my fingers farther forward, but then when I turn the aperture ring, I inevitably turn the zoom ring as well. It's not a big deal. I know it's not the end of the world. I'm just finding with the RX10 Mark III, there are a lot of these little issues, these just little niggling issues that kind of make it annoying to use sometimes. So out here at the Walker House, historic part of Inglewood Bird Sanctuary here, and it would have been nice to have lived right next to the river. Beautiful piece of land. It's also a good res test. We decided to compare it against the Panasonic FZ1000. Now, when we first did our RX10 and FZ1000 video, we kind of compared them against each other, and we concluded that the Panasonic was a more desirable stills camera because it had the extra zoom range and it had the DFD autofocus. It is still a faster autofocusing camera. Nobody's better than Panasonic in mirrorless, but you know, overall, this has come a long way. This now has a great zoom lens, and we want to compare the resolution against the FZ1000's 400mm and this lens at 400mm. Now, looking at both photos here at 400mm, we've come to the conclusion that the Sony is delivering better results. Now, that could partially be that the sensor is newer, but it's this lens. It is definitely sharper at the 400mm range, and you are going to shoot the camera there quite a bit. We did test both at the wide-angle range, and the results aren't as different. We're getting very similar resolution, very similar look. Now, that is nice because the FZ1000 is a much older camera, and it can still hold its own. But if you're shooting the long range, the RX10 is going to give you the advantage for sure.
Hey guys, it's Jordan here to talk about video on the RX10 III, and I really consider the RX10 and RX10 II really kind of camcorder replacements that also happen to shoot really wonderful stills, and a big part of that was their 2.8 constant lens. Now going to the RX10 III, we get much more range on it, but also it's now a variable aperture, 2.4 to f4. Now what that means is once I expose my shot, if I decide to change my frame a little bit, suddenly I'll see my exposure shift, and on this it's quite dramatic. And as soon as you hit 100mm on it, you're basically at f4 at that point. So it drops down very quickly, and the range I'm generally going to be shooting is within that 24 to 100. In our RX10 II video, Chris and I were actually arguing a little bit, and I said 24 to 200 2.8 constant is all I need in a video lens. They put a lot more in it, but as a result, it's a lot more inconvenient for me now. Now this camera is using the same sensor, their stacked CMOS chip that we saw in the RX10 II, RX100 Mark IV. It's gorgeous image quality. In fact, they're using the same chip type on their new Z150 professional camera. So the quality is lovely. The 4K is extremely sharp on it. but it's also giving you great slow-mo capability. You're getting beautiful 240 frame per second recording. Now it's only for 2 seconds, but you can also drop this over to the 120 frame mode, and you can shoot for 29 minutes or until your card or battery fills up. Now there is also the much advertised 480 and 960 frame per second recording, but they're both terrible, so I'm not going to talk about them. Covered in moire, aliasing. See, now I'm talking about them, which is exactly what I didn't want to do. Consider this a 240 frame per second slow-mo cam, and you'll get some lovely quality off it. One thing I've always loved about the RX10 series, and this is no exception, is the audio support. We've got a mic jack, a headphone line, both 3.5, and also a really decent preamp on it, so I am very comfortable using this as my primary audio recording device. Now if you want even better than that, this has an active shoe and it supports Sony's XLR attachment as well, so you can run professional audio into this thing. It's pretty sweet, especially in a camera this price point. So aside from the variable aperture lens, it might sound like the RX10 III is a really sweet deal for video shooters, but it's got some serious issues, and the biggest one by far is that the RX10 II and the RX10 both had a built-in 3-stop neutral density filter, which is missing on this larger body. And that's a huge problem. I think when you're shooting in bright light, an ND filter is an absolute necessity. And of course I can screw one onto the front of it, but the convenience of the built-in filter was one of the reasons I loved the RX10 and RX10 II. It's a real shame to see that missing. As well, when you punch in to check your focus, you'll find the image is still very soft, especially when you're shooting in 4K mode. Makes it really difficult to check focus on these cameras. Especially with that 1-inch chip, it's tough to tell between something that's slightly out of focus and perfectly in focus. And I fought with that a lot while we were out today. Other thing too is the price on this. It's quite a bit more expensive than the RX10 II. And honestly, feature for feature, since I don't use the super telephoto on this that much, I would say that the RX10 II is a better camera for less money right now. So if your primary interest is video, I don't think there's that much reason for this unless you're shooting wildlife or sports where you're using the super telephoto all the time.
When we talked about the original RX10 and the RX10 Mark II, we found these cameras to be very capable video cameras and kind of like an expensive hobbyist family camera, you know, something you can do nice video with, 4K, something you have a good decent zoom range with, nice bright lens and decent image quality. And this has certainly stepped things up with that big zoom range. It opens up a lot of possibilities for wildlife photographers or travelers, safari, that kind of stuff. But there's still a lot of features on this camera that, although they're good, aren't fully implemented well. Focusing was actually very good performing on this camera, but I've looked for it and looked for it and looked for it. We got so much customizability, I still can't set back button autofocus, and that's driving me crazy. As well, focus selection, we really need a toggle on here, or we need a touchscreen. Sony, why no touchscreen? This camera's expensive, and I expect it on here, and it'd be ideal on here for both video and stills, and we don't have it. You have to toggle between autofocus, point selector, then use your left, right, up, down, and then back out of it. It's kind of annoying. You know, other things overall on the RX10 Mark III, a little heavy, some of the controls, the aperturing I didn't love. So some of these things just keep me from really wanting to buy this camera and recommend it fully. Now, of course, this is a hybrid camera, it does both stills and video, and Jordan's talked a lot about the video features, and again, the overall thing that we get from this is it's not really a big upgrade. I mean, essentially the RX10 Mark II with a few extra features. We did have fun with the high frame rate stuff, but overall, this camera has only really implemented a new longer lens. That's about it. So our final thoughts on this camera are it's an overall minor upgrade. You might find this long lens something you can't live without, but you also might find that an RX10 Mark II on the market is a better buy overall. Now guys, don't forget, tweet us, Instagram, subscribe, check us out, and I hope you saw that vintage camera. The contest is going on. This is video 3 of 5. Check out those details below. Overall, it was a nice camera to use. It's just not quite a home run. Anyways, guys, we'll see you soon. Thanks so much for watching.